we gotta talk about where PlayStation is headed in 2024. Today, PlayStation had their summer presentation in the form of a State of Play coming in right at the end of May, like some people were hoping would happen. And what was already interesting about them doing a State of Play versus a traditional showcase is that implies a smaller show. We already kind of knew that this year was going to be a lightly slower one for PlayStation. They themselves said that this fiscal year, they weren't gonna have any like big AAA titles that were at least a part of their major franchises, which doesn't mean no games. And in fact, as part of the State of Play, we did get quite a few games announced for this year. But this does give us a clear idea of what the rest of PlayStation's 2024 is going to look like. There's always the chance that additional announcements and things could happen eventually, but chances are this is probably going to be, the most full look at how the rest of this year is going to go. Although I think there is one particular big announcement that PlayStation is not really talking about yet that could still happen for this year. To begin with, let's recap some of the biggest announcements to come out of this State of Play. So overall, they talked about 14 games in total. Not all of these are necessarily PlayStation 5 exclusive things or brand new reveals. We got some news like God of War Ragnarok getting a PC port later this year in September. We got some reveals for some PSVR 2 titles, with Skydance making a VR fantasy game that actually does look kind of interesting to me. And then a brand new Alien VR game, which in concept is super freaking cool because I love Alien, and the idea of doing that kind of horror game in VR is awesome. Although this is one of the situations where we got a very low frame rate trailer, which always gives a bit of a weird feeling. Now, as part of this presentation, there were a few games that we've at least already known about in some form, some more than others. For instance, we got a further look at some more gameplay out of Marvel Rivals, which is not going to be a PlayStation exclusive, but part of this announcement at State of Play was that they were getting a PS5 exclusive beta in July. We also got another look at the remaster for Until Dawn, which didn't get a specific release date, but did say that it is planned for fall of this year. Silent Hill 2 Remake also got an expanded look, and there's actually a Silent Hill dedicated presentation that's after the State of Play, but I'm just focusing on PlayStation right now. But that also gave us a confirmed release date for that game happening on October 8th of this year. And then I would say what are probably the biggest two games as far as updates go were Concord and Monster Hunter Wilds. Now, Concord, if you're unfamiliar with, this was a game that PlayStation announced at their showcase last year, but didn't really give us much of an actual look at it other than just a very teasery trailer involving a spaceship. And now we know that it is a 5v5 hero shooter that clearly draws a lot of inspiration from Guardians of the Galaxy as far as just the general flavor goes. Hero shooters are kind of a weird thing for me because this is one of the situations where it's a genre that there's already a lot of competition and some very strong established games in it. Overwatch is obviously the main big example people will point to because that is also 5v5, which, to be fair, as far as I know, while I don't keep super close tabs of all these communities, it seems like Overwatch has been having a bit of a struggle with its fan base, so maybe it is a little bit more ripe for someone else to enter in on, but it still feels like a crowded genre and try to get in on. And so that's one of my main questions for a game like this is, what is it going to do different to really set itself apart from the already established popular ones? And I will say in its favor, one thing about it they just showed a little bit of that does have my curiosity is that there's actual character storyline progression that's tied in as part of playing matches. So it almost works out in some ways kind of like how Hades works for the roguelike genre, where there's story being told over time, but instead of a very direct storyline that is just the result of, getting through major plot events and the end, it's really more of just keep doing runs of some sort, in this case being multiplayer matches, and then you get a little bit of story bits for different characters and how their relationships grow on the ship. So that's something that I actually do find really intriguing. I'm very curious to see how well it's going to do against competition, including stuff even from this own show like Marvel Rivals. And so it might just have a bit of a tough road ahead. As for Monster Hunter Wilds, this was revealed at Game Awards last year, but we didn't get the most in-depth look at all the gameplay, so this gave us a much broader look of the game in action. Visually, obviously, this has more in common with Monster Hunter Worlds rather than Rise, since Rise was a bit more of a stylized art style to work on the Switch. And while a lot of stuff from this presentation is planned for this year, this is one of the games where we just got a very broad announcement of it's coming out in 2025. Now, as far as new things go, some of the stuff I think might have been announced previously at smaller venues, but this was definitely the big debut for some titles. A couple smaller things like Infinity Nikki. We had a couple action fantasy style games going on with Where Wind Meets and Ballad of Antara, which actually does look very interesting to me. I dig the fact that that one showcased having multiple playable characters with different play styles. So that's something that always gets my brain going for action games. I don't necessarily always want to have just the one play style of a main character or something that's customizable, like in a lot of Souls games where it's based on your weapon choice. We get the reveal of a new Dynasty Warriors with Dynasty Warriors Origin, which does look really cool. I'm a little mixed on these ones because while I like Dynasty Warriors, I've kind of hit a point with the franchise where I get more excited for their collabs. You know, I love when they've worked with other franchises like Zelda or Persona or Fire Emblem. So getting an actual brand new mainline Dynasty Warriors, I am excited about, and it does look good, but there's a part of me that's also like, all right, cool, this looks awesome. But when's the next collab? And then the big final stinger reveal for the show, and this is something that was rumored a lot this past week, we got the reveal of Team Asobi's next game, which is simply titled Astrobot. From the looks of it, this is taking the basic concept of what was in Astro's Playroom, which was really a tech demo, but stood well on its own 2 feet as just a small, wonderful little game to play that was free on all PS5s. It's taking the core concepts of that and expanding it out to a much larger game. Larger in scope, more biomes, more levels, and one thing that was interesting too, based on what we saw on snippets of the trailer, is the fact that in Astro's Playroom, we had lots of really fun cameos of bots that were dressed up as different popular PlayStation franchises or games that had been featured on PlayStation systems before. And from the looks of this trailer, some of those characters are actually going to be playing a larger role. And so while I know this isn't necessarily like the biggest IP that PlayStation currently owns, and I know some people are probably really wanting more information on some other franchises, Ghost of Tsushima has been a very popular one to ask about. But honestly, I love Astro's Playroom so much. I'm very excited to see a brand new standalone title. Everything that trailer looked gorgeous. And I think something I really appreciate about it is that so many other first-party PlayStation titles have become very focused on the idea of being these 3D cinematic grand story kind of things. And Astro really calls back to an older style of game where it's just fun and lighthearted and has this energy to it. Now, taking a step back from all these announcements and just looking at how that fills out the rest of this year, a lot of stuff that was talked about at the State of Play is slated for some time in 24, although some of them still have slightly hanging dates. Concord, for instance, doesn't have a full release date yet, but is having a beta starting in July. Until Dawn Remaster is slated for fall of this year, Silent Hill 2 Remake is in October, and Astrobot is landing September 6th of this year. And some of the other games that were covered in the State of Play are showing up this year as well, but those are more likely multi-platform situations like with Marvel Rivals. And so what this really means for PlayStation's schedule exclusive-wise that we know for right now is that we're getting one big new single-player, family-friendly game with Astro. We're getting a couple of remasters and remakes with things like Until Dawn and Silent Hill 2, which admittedly Silent Hill 2 could be a more heavy remake to the point of feeling like an original title, similar to what happened with things like the Resident Evil 2 remake, where it was very different from the game it was based on. And then at least one major live service title with Concord. Now again, PlayStation themselves have already set the tone a little bit this year that this wasn't going to be one where we had a lot of major brand new additions. I'm personally actually pretty happy with some of the stuff we're getting right now. Astro alone is a really big win to me. I'm cautiously optimistic for Silent Hill 2. I don't think this is necessarily going to go down as one of the strongest years for the platform, but there is some good stuff. And one thing that I am very curious about with this is that, you know, not only are these the games that we're getting this year, one thing that was not talked about at the State of Play, and they set that expectation early when they announced it, is there was no hardware news. Obviously, one of the really big rumors with PlayStation lately has been the possible existence of a PlayStation 5 Pro. Lots of rumors and things have talked about it being this year. Historically, when PlayStation has had hardware news like that, they might hint at it at a summer showcase, but they don't really talk in-depth specs until they're closer to the actual release window. And so the main point I really want to make with that is that I think some people might be wondering where a Pro is because it wasn't talked about as part of a summer showcase. And I don't think that's necessarily a sign that it's not happening this year. I don't think it's a sign it's going to happen either for sure. Ultimately, we are just working with rumors and leaks here. But I think there is a chance that at some point later this year, we could get an additional PlayStation conference of some sort focusing on that. I don't know if they're necessarily going to have any additional news to tie into that. I don't think we're going to be seeing some surprise additional games coming out side by side with it, which is one of the interesting questions about it, is that if a 5 Pro released this year, what's kind of like the big tie-in game to go for that? Because right now, again, we mostly have Remakes and Astro to work with, which it doesn't necessarily have to have, but obviously when the point of something like a 5 Pro is pushing the power of the system and enabling you to do things that the regular system can't do, it would make sense to have a game tied in that really helps showcase that fact. Something else the State of Play reaffirmed, that also came out as news last night actually, is PlayStation's approach to multi-platform, specifically releasing their games on PC, where their upcoming new CEO Herman Hulst said that they are planning on making games multi-platform at launch right away when they are live service titles, Concord being an example of this, which did say PlayStation and PC betas in July, whereas single-player stuff, things like Astro, that is going to be a console exclusive, not coming to anything else immediately, with PC ports happening later down the line, in the hopes that those kind of major titles, you know, interest people in grabbing a PS5 so they don't have to wait, which I'm honestly not sure how well that actually works at the end of the day. I've always been of the mind that PC players are PC players, console gamers are console gamers, and there are some people that end up walking the line on both and will just buy it wherever it shows up first. But that is the strategy they're sticking to for now, and that is what a lot of these games reaffirmed with their announced release dates and what platforms they're coming to. All in all, this was a solid show. I think PlayStation had the right idea of marketing this as a state of play. Last year when they did a summer showcase, they did call it a showcase, and reactions and feelings were a bit more mixed, especially based on what games really focused on during that showcase. And I think this one ended up working out better. I think this was actually a better conference overall than last year's, and also set that expectation just a little bit lower by calling it a state of play and being like, hey, it's only 30 minutes long. We're going to focus on a bunch of games back to back. We have some new reveals. We've got some updates. And while not everything I think was an absolute home run, the strong stuff that was here was excellent. So those were just my thoughts on what PlayStation's 2024 is going to look like after that state of play. There's always the chance they could have some additional announcements, things to go off of, but I get the feeling that aside from some hardware news, this really is going to be it for games this year. I would more than happily like to be wrong and be surprised with additional games, but this is what it looks like for this year. As always, if you enjoyed the video, hit the thumbs up button to let me know. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you guys later.